Well, now that we've seen how to draw straight lines, arcs, and now complex curves, let's take another close look at fills. Up to this point, we've just been using solid color fills, but our toolkit is capable of a lot more. For instance, we can define gradients and use them as fills, as well as patterns, and we can take a look at shadows. So we've got a lot to look at here still. Let me go back to my working files, and you can see I've got a number 5 tri-gradient fills file, so let's open that one up. I'll pull it up to my browser, and I'll open it up in the TextEdit program. And here, once again, we've got a few things set up. I can see my canvas is set up, and it has our border around it, so we can see the extents of it. And in my canvas, I've already got drawn a red rectangle. If we go back and look at the code, we can see the startup for our canvas drawing. We've got a begin path and a rectangle draw. And then you can see we've got a fill style red, and then just a simple fill command. Well, let's try to put a gradient in here instead. In defining a gradient, we have basically 2 steps that we have to deal with. First, we need to define the gradient, and in doing so, we'll set up how the gradient's going to be applied. And then we simply need to add color stops to it so that our gradient will represent the color ramp that we're intending. Let's start by making the gradient. I'll go right up here above the fill style command, and we'll simply add a line to define our gradient. I'm going to create a variable for it, so I'll start off with my var keyword, and I'm just going to call it grad. Now, to make a gradient, we're going to be using a create linear gradient command. So I'll just use my context like we did before in our drawing, dot, and then create linear gradient. For a linear gradient, we simply want a start and end point, and this allows us to define the direction of the gradient, as well as its application to our shapes. We can tell by the rectangle command that we've got 1010 as our top left corner. You can see we're just 10 pixels off the edge of the canvas, both in horizontal and a vertical direction. And then our rectangle is 280 pixels wide and 130 pixels tall. That leaves us another 10 pixel gap on the other end, and if we add the 210 pixels plus the 280, that gives us the 300 pixel width of our canvas. And just so we can easily see where our gradient is set, I'm going to define a line up here at the 0 line at the top of our canvas, and I'm going to start it 50 pixels in and end it at 250 pixels there. So we'll just add those coordinates to our create linear gradient function. I'll start off with 50, 0. That'll be our start point, 50 pixels in X, and 0 means it'll be right at the top of the canvas. And then we'll run it out to 250 pixels by, again, 0, so it's at the top of the canvas. Now we just need to add our colors so that we can see the gradient. So right below where we set up our grad variable, I'm going to start out with grad, since that's our gradient variable name, and I'm going to use a function called add color stop. With this function, what I'm going to do is pick out a position along the line that we just created and set that as our color stop, and then define what color it's going to be. I'll set up red at the beginning, and I want the red color right at the start. So I'll set up 0 as the position, and then the color red. Now, just like any color definition, we can use a hexadecimal color, or we could even use an RGB value or an HSL value if you want. Now, to be a real gradient, we need at least one more color stop. So let's add a blue at the other end. Again, I'll choose grad, add color stop. And this time for the position, I'm going to specify 1. Now notice that we're talking about the whole length of the line that we created up here, the one that starts at 50, 0 and goes out to 250, 0. So in this case, 50 would be the first end of the line, that'll be 0, and we're going to use 1 to specify the other position. You can specify additional positions just by using a fractional value and stating where you'd like them to be placed. Now I want this one to be blue on the other side, so I'll add blue in as the color name. And let's go ahead and apply this to our fill so that we can see what it looks like. Down here we've got a line that says context fill style equals red. Well, here's where the style comes in. We can use the fill style command to specify a single solid color like we have here, or if we wanted to use our gradient, I'll simply replace red with grad. Since grad is a variable, it doesn't go in quotes. And what this will do is apply our gradient as a fill style. Then when the fill command comes along, it'll fill it with our gradient. So let's see what that looks like. I'll save my changes. We'll go back out and refresh our page. And now we can see a nice gradient that goes from red to blue. And if you look carefully, you can see exactly where the gradient starts. I specified an x of 50 for the start of our gradient up here at the top, and you can see that it's solid red right up to that point, and at 50 pixels, this is where the gradient starts changing the colors. We also specified our blue at 250, which is a little bit in here, so you can see that from the 250 position onward, it's solid blue. But for x values lower than 250, we can see that gradient and the changing colors coming in. Now, just for fun, let's add a third color stop. You can add as many as you want. You just have to pick a position and set a color. I'll go back over here, and in between the two color stops that we had before, I'll add another color stop. So I'll go and add grad.addColorStop. And I can put this color anywhere I want. I'm going to put it closer to the red side of things. So I'll do that by making it 0.3. Now remember, we're talking about the length of the line from 50 pixels to 250. So a third that way in should be right about here, a little bit before the halfway point. And what I'll set for a color on that one is just white. Now let's save our change and see what we've got. I'll just go refresh the page, and you can see that that white is added right in at the 0.3 position. And our gradient now goes from red to white to blue. Now, in addition to linear gradients, we can also add radial gradients. So let's try that one. We haven't done much where we've added a second path, but I'm going to add one to our canvas here. We've already got a begin path for our first rectangle. So I'm just going to go down after the context fill, and let's add in a second rectangle. To save a little time, I'm going to copy all of our drawing elements and just change them. So I'll copy everything and paste it down here at the bottom. And you can see now we have a new begin path. And let's just modify the rectangle so it's down here at the bottom instead of up at the top. I'll leave the x value of 10, but I'll set the y value at 160. That'll push it down here for the top corner. And we'll leave the width and height settings as they were. But just so we can work with a different gradient, I'm going to change the name of our variable here to grad2. Now make sure we do that for all of our color stops and our assignment for the fill style as well. I'll use the same colors, red, white, and blue, but I'll make one simple change here. We'll go up to the line where we created the gradient, and we'll specify that this one's going to be a radial gradient instead. So I'll use create radial gradient. Now, of course, our radial gradient also needs some values to define its position and its application to our graphics. But it's going to have a different kind of line that we're going to set up. Since this is a radial gradient, what we want to do is create a line that extends from the center point of wherever we want our gradient to start, and it goes out to the edge and specifies a radius value. So here's what I'm going to do for ours. I'm going to set it up so that our gradient is kind of along the center line, so we'll start off with an x value of 150. Now we're drawing a rectangle down here at the bottom, so I'm going to specify the y value as 250, so it'll be down here someplace. Next value we need to specify is a radius. And this radius will represent the center dot or disk of our radial gradient. I'm just going to make it very small, so I'm going to make it 5 pixels wide. So we'll have a dot in the center of our gradient that's 5 pixels wide of whatever solid color starts our gradient out. And then we want to specify a point for the final end of our gradient. This final disk of our gradient gets a center point as well. And if I want the gradient to radiate out from the center, I would actually use the same center point we had before. So we'll put it at 150 and 250 so that our two disks will be concentric. Then I need to give a radius value for this one, and I want this to cover the entire rectangle that we're talking about here. So I'll make the radius of this second disk 150 pixels, and that will extend it so that the radius will cover the whole area. Now we've added a second path to our canvas, drawn a rectangle, created a gradient, and then filled our element with a gradient. So we're ready to try it out. I'll save our changes, and let's go see what it looks like. When I refresh the page, you can see that we've got a gradient that starts down here at 150 and 250 pixels. We specified a 5 pixel radius for the center of it, so somewhere in the center of this red, we've got a 5 pixel radius there. Then we said that the end of the gradient is going to be on the same center, so they're concentric, and it goes out to 150 pixels. And you can see that we have the same kind of element in here. Now, notice I used the same color stops. 0 is going to be the middle in this point, which is red. 0.3 out from there is going to be white. And then the full radius, which was 150, is where our blue value comes in out here.